UF Supreme Court. I stand before you today to appeal a ruling by the Elections Commission which found we, the defendant, Watch Party, guilty of violating Student Body Statute 761.1. We respectfully submit that this ruling is inconsistent with the court's previous interpretation of the statute. The crux of our appeal rests on three key points. First, the Elections Commission's interpretation of Student Body Statute 761.1 contradicts the court's clear guidance and interpretation in Ray election cycle. In that case, this very Supreme Court explicitly stated, we decline to accept any characterization of Student Body Statute 761.1 as a demand that campaigning must only begin on the first day of the active election cycle. This Commission's ruling directly contradicts the interpretation, imposing a restrictive timeline on political speech that this court has previously rejected. Second, the Commission's attempt to distinguish between campaign-like activities and campaigning lacks any statutory or judicial foundation. This artificial distinction creates an ambiguous standard that leaves students uncertain about what political activities they can engage in outside of the election cycle. Such uncertainty inevitably leads to self-censorship and reduced participation in student government, an outcome that this court has explicitly sought to avoid. Third, the Commission's ruling, if allowed to stand, would impose a chilling effect on political speech and participation in student government. As this court noted in Ray election cycle, there is simply no indication anywhere within the 700 codes that the intention of the statute 761.1 was to ensure that no campaigning activities can take place on behalf of any candidate or political party outside of the designated election cycle. To hold otherwise would impose strict liability on virtually every student remotely involved in a campaign, and would certainly exercise a chilling effect on participation in student government. This is precisely the outcome we face if the Commission's ruling is upheld. We acknowledge that our social media was registered as a registered political advertisement. However, this was out of an abundance of caution and commitment to transparency. We maintain that our actions fall squarely within the realm of campaigning that this court has previously held as are permissible outside of the election cycle. In conclusion, we respectfully ask this court to overturn the Elections Commission's ruling and reaffirm its previous interpretation of Student Body 761.1. Doing so will preserve the spirit of open political discourse that is essential for a thriving student government and ensure that students can engage in political speech without fear of punitive action. I would like to thank the justices for their time and consideration, and I stand by ready to answer any questions that the court may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Any members of the court have any questions?
Do you have a date for the complaint that was 17?
So your social media post, what did it include?
Our platform.
Can you explain your platform?
It was for fair representation, fair access, and opportunity to vote.
For the political party?
Yes.
So your argument is essentially that there's a difference between campaign material and campaign-like material,
No.
the latter being permissible?
No, we're arguing that everything is campaigning is allowed outside of the designated election cycle designated by 761.1.
You said other cases have held that?
Yes, in Ray election cycle.
It's explicitly held that campaigning is allowed outside the
Campaigning verbatim and campaign activities, both that are interchangeable east.
I read that case a little bit differently, so maybe can you explain to me where you're getting that information from that case?
The case,
Yeah,
so the petitioner, who at the time was Senator David Bradshaw, he asked for basically to the court to clarify as if the 761.1 was a statement of fact, or if it was in fact a prohibition or timeline for when campaigning can occur, to which the court then gave the statement of that would indicate a chilling effect on participation in student government.
Can you quote that?
Yes.
Refer to me exactly where that would be understood.
Yeah. I mean, I said it in the opening, but I can find it here. Okay. Right here. The court shares Senator Bradshaw's frustration with the confusing and often contradictory language of the election codes. Given the positive information available regarding legislative intent, we decline to intersect any characterization of 761.1 as a demand that campaigning must only begin on the first day of the actual election cycle. There is simply no indication anywhere within the 700 codes that the intention of this statute was to ensure that no campaigning activities can take place on behalf of any candidate or political party outside of the designated election cycle.
But later in that case, it does say that even though, that's not defined, the election commission can hold parties and candidates accountable for their actions taken outside of the election cycle.
Yes, as if doing like campaign violations, like if I was to campaign in a dorm or something, or if I was to like place a banner where it's not supposed to be, like
So
you can.
what's the distinction between what you're saying right now and what y'all did on your?
That our thing was like putting a post out. Like we're found guilty of campaigning outside of the election cycle, but that within itself is not a crime. Like that's not something that should be punished, or not should be punished. That isn't punished by law. Like the Supreme Court has laid out that that's not something that should be like
But campaigning in a dorm should be not allowed outside the election cycle?
outside. I mean, campaigning outside of a dorm in general, like within the election cycle, is also illegal. But it's like if you are campaigning outside of the election cycle, and like you're doing, like you can still be liable for all of the other things in the 700 codes. Like if you were going into a dorm and campaigning, you can be held liable for that, even though it's not within the 4-week frame of like slating and registering.
I agree with you, but to continue, the case that you refer to defines campaigning as any intentional action in support of or in opposition to a candidate or political party for the elective student body office, included but not limited to the distribution of literature and posting of materials. So how is that not campaigning, posting of materials when it directly says?
No, it is, but I'm talking about 761.1. It's not whether or not like the actual thing was campaigning or not. It's the fact that we are allowed to campaign outside of the election cycle, and
It doesn't say that.
it does. It says it verbatim.
So what does 761.1 do?
It's basically the statement of when campaigning can occur. So at the first day of the informational meeting to the last day of closing of polls.
So is that not what the Elections Commission is enforcing against you here?
But that's not. It wasn't supposed to be enforced in the first place. Like in this case, like it outlined that this is not something that like if you were to enforce it, it would have a chilling effect. Like this is to prevent like any legal repercussions for campaigning outside of the election cycle.
So you can't enforce 761.1?
In the sense, it's just it was a statement of fact. Like that's what the court ruled.
So how, can you give me a hypothetical about how 761.1 might be enforced? I'm trying to reconcile your reading of this case with 761.1, because it sounds to me like you're saying that the case essentially declared 761.1 unconstitutional.
No, that's not. It says that the Elections Commission punishing us for campaigning outside of the election cycle, that's not allowed. Like this court has upheld that if you are campaigning outside of the election cycle, that's still allowed. Like you can't like prohibit that. They strict like it's not supposed to be read as a strict timeline.
So how would they enforce 761.1 without some sort of?
It's not meant to be anything enforced. It's just like a statement of fact.
So then,
Because of the 4-week period, it's like when you have registration, it's like when you can do like the registration and getting the candidates and doing the slating and all that. Like that's when that like formal, and like when you're legally registered as a party. But like once that's over, like you still exist outside as like an entity.
So under your interpretation of 761.1, you can campaign and post and do anything year-round?
It's not my interpretation, it's the court's interpretation.
The court's interpretation was campaign-like activities, however, they literally define campaigning as posting materials.
Yeah, but you could, they're just stating what that is. But it's also stating that,
Campaign-like, they differentiated.
but you can only understand campaign like in the context of everything that you read before it. Like it's like, that would not make sense if you hadn't read the previous statute and the previous text in this precedent.
Can you distinguish for me what campaign-like versus campaign activity means?
I wouldn't be able to distinguish. That's up to the court. It hasn't done that. It just, I read this as the court's attempt to establish of like any interpretation of campaign like whatever is like a broad protection under this thing. It uses all three elements of it. So campaigning.
Campaigning is defined as posting materials.
Yes, but the thing is campaigning outside of the election cycle is the thing that we're being charged for. Like that, and that's not anything that's like banned. Like you can post materials outside of the election cycle just within the active campaign cycle. like your own, like that's what they define as like when you get like registered, when you're getting like you're slating your for candidates and stuff. You can still like participate in student government outside of that 4-week period.
Where is that outlined?
There is no indication anywhere in the 700 codes that the intention of the statute was to ensure that no campaign activities can take place on behalf of any candidate or political party outside of the designated election cycle.
Yes, and then it goes on to hold that it's
I don't.
not prohibiting and engaging in campaign-like activities.
In the conclusion, but you have, it's the whole text, like you read the ending of the text in context of what's being read before.
What's your argument for why this would not frustrate the purpose of statute 761 by not enforcing it?
But the purpose of statute 61 is just to like state when like the active election cycle begins. It's not supposed to be like something that you enforce to like, it said that it was like the court shares its frustration of the confusing and contradictory language of the election codes. After that stating with the original argument was for it to be worded as a statement of fact, which was 761.1, or if it was a strict timeline, to which they explicitly said it's not supposed to be read as a strict timeline for when it can happen.
I never saw that.
It's in here. It says timeline. It's in. If you look at page 10 of the Supreme Court report of Volume 2.
And what paragraph are you reading? That is not a strict timeline. See something in page 12 on the first paragraph that makes me think that it is a strict timeline because the court characterized it back in 2012 as a rule, a rule that everyone should follow so that student government can.
But no, but that was because the senator was saying that the court doesn't have the jurisdiction to enforce those things, and the court doubled down like, no, we agree with you. We basically like this is not supposed to be read as like a prohibition when campaigning can occur outside of the designated election cycle, but you can't say that we don't have the ability to enforce our laws. That's what that paragraph reads.
So when you posted your post, was that before hold on a second, I'm gonna go back. Was that before the time beginning of the informational meeting that Supervisor of Elections?
That was outside of it.
Yeah, I don't think
That
they're
was
disputing
before?
that. I think if I'm understanding their argument right, they're saying that this case means that 761.1 can't be enforced. Like, it's not something that that the EC would act upon. That it's just saying where it is. It doesn't give any.
That it shouldn't be on the books, is what he said.
But
Is that?
yes, that is effectively what I'm saying.
Which this case didn't necessarily hold that it was just a statement of fact. It just declined to hold that it was demanding, but it didn't necessarily.
Come again?
Sorry, this prior case that you referenced didn't actually come forward and say that 761.1 is just a statement of fact. It just declined to take the step to say that it was demanding.
Well, the question in the beginning was that. Find it. Petitioner further asserts that read in conjunction with the definition of campaigning, it appears that 761.1 is simply stating that as a matter of fact, intentional actions in favor of political candidates and political party begin on the day of the informational meeting at the start of the election cycle. He concludes that the sole purpose of 761.1 is to observe a fact that has no statutory effect and is thus redundant. He therefore requests a clarification on whether 761.1 is a mere statement of fact or a prohibition against campaigning outside of an election cycle, to which the court said that it should in no way, shape, or form be read as a prohibition outside of the election cycle.
Yeah, where is that? That's what I'm asking. Do you characterize what the petitioner was asking?
Yes, but I'm also then, after the court responded to that question by saying the court shares Senator Bradshaw's frustration with the confusing and often contradictory language of the election codes. Given the positive information available regarding legislative intent, we decline to accept any characterization of 761.1 as a demand that campaigning must only begin on the first day of the active election cycle.
How do you square that with the very last sentence of the opinion that says the provisions of the 700 codes must be conscientiously followed where applicable, both during the election cycle and outside?
Yes, outside of it, meaning that you can campaign outside of the election cycle, but you are still able to be guilty if you're campaigning any of the other violations of the 700 codes. So like I said, if you put banners where you're not supposed to have banners, if you're campaigning in the dorms, you can be punished for that still because it's outside of, whether it's in the election cycle or outside of the election cycle, you can be punished because you're still you're engaging in campaigning. One is just the period designated under 761.1 where you go in and you get your candidates, you get your slating, you formally register the party. And then outside of that, you can still participate in in campaigning for your party. It's just not going to be formalized when you have the whole registration process and you're not getting senators it disbands after that 6 or 4 week time frame.
So you're saying a political party can still be punished for not following the rules?
Yes.
Meaning
That's what the court says.
761 can still be enforced against?
But 761.1 isn't something that can be punishable. It's just a statement of fact, as this court has upheld.
So you're saying that all of the 700 codes, except for 761, can be enforced against?
Well, the 700 codes that would be relevant towards that clearly outline that this is a strict prohibition of something you cannot do when you're campaigning. You can still be punished for that.
Do any members of the court find that this case actually basically overruled or removed 761's enforcement power?
Yeah, that's what I'm having trouble with.
I'm confused still about that.
And another place in the case that's given me some concern on that front is that the last sentence in the paragraph that starts with the court shares Senator Bradshaw's frustration says, to hold otherwise would be to impose strict liability on virtually every student remotely involved in a campaign and would certainly exercise a chilling effect on participation in student government. The fact that they were thinking that to hold otherwise would impose strict liability tells me that their holding was a lot less than what you're saying it was. Because I'm thinking there's some space in between the two. There's space in between imposing strict liability and on the other end of the spectrum, basically saying 761.1 is just a statement of fact. I think there's space in there, and that's what that sentence is acknowledging.
How I read it, because it says at the previous sentence before that, there's simply no indication anywhere within the 700 codes that the intention of this statute was to ensure that no campaigning activities can take place on behalf of on any candidate or political party outside of the designated election cycle. To hold otherwise, in reference to that previous sentence, as in if you were to enforce it, would be to impose strict liability on virtually every student remotely involved in a campaign and would certainly exercise a chilling effect on participation.
Right. I think that second sentence contextualizes what they mean when they say no campaigning activities. They're not thinking about people posting their platforms. They're thinking about, we don't want to have a law that says, these parties can't be getting their finances in order. They can't be ordering shirts and stuff before this cycle starts.
It just says that the intention of the statute was to ensure that there's no indication that the intention of the statute was to ensure that no campaigning activities can take place on behalf, right? So that's they're saying that the statute is not meant that you can't campaign outside of the election cycle. If you were to hold otherwise, then it would be pretty bad for participation in student government.
Before you kick off your campaign, would you concede that there's things you need to get in order to fulfill the campaign?
As in what?
As in meeting with who you're going to potentially run with.
Absolutely, you have to that's
Writing down
participating.
your platform, right?
Yeah, you have to brainstorm these ideas before. To have it within a 4-week period is that's not a lot of time.
Would you concede that as meaning what the court was deciphering as campaign-like activity?
No, because the court also previously outlined both campaigning and campaign activities, which are both still explicitly defined in our 700.4D and E.
And campaigning includes exactly what you're violating.
No, I understand that this is campaigning, but I'm just saying that this is not the act of us campaigning is not illegal within itself under this statute 761.1.
I don't think that's what this court did here. I agree with Connor here, where the court builds in some leeway for people to prepare for the election, but I can't imagine anything more directly campaigning than posting a platform. That is so directly advocating for your party that it's not what the court meant in this case.
I mean,
I don't know.
I think the language that you guys are feeding on here is not quite as strong as what you're characterizing it as. The way I read it is it's recognizing that there's things you have to do that are part of a campaign prior to the opening of an election cycle. You have to get the people who are going to run the campaign together. You have to start ordering shirts, ordering the banners that you're going to put up on the first day of the election cycle. And so when we read these sentences about there's no indication that this statute was to ensure that no campaigning activities can take place on behalf of any candidate, and blah, blah, blah. What that sentence is doing is not stipulating the other extreme that you guys are on, but instead it's saying, hey, this 761.1, it's not meant to give complete, it's not meant to completely shut out everything you could possibly do that's remotely connected with a campaign.
It says we decline to accept any characterization of 761.1 as a demand, that campaigning must only begin on the first day of the active election cycle, and then it follows up with that. It's saying there's no way this can be read as a demand, this to not be a prohibition that you could can only participate in political activities within this period designated. It's just a statement of when those things happen, because you have the informational meeting, then slating happens, and you get you do other campaigning stuff as well, because it's still a campaign cycle, but that formal aspect is formalized in 761.1, but it's not a prohibition. That's what
What is the purpose of setting aside an election cycle in the statute if there's nothing contingent on it?
To have a period when you can formally register your party, formally registered, and within this thing, and then get your slating, get your candidates, and then then it ends after the final day of the election.
What ends?
The existence of the party as a formal legal entity within UFSG.
Can you repeat that last sentence you said?
Which sentence?
Your answer to CT's question?
I think you said the existence of the
Yeah, it's formalized.
being the student political party.
Okay, so
I just have trouble reading 761.1 as being impotent.
I mean, the court also had difficulty at the time of this reading where it stated that, but it did clarify that there's no way this can be just a prohibition for when these things can happen.
Because it's my understanding that case didn't change any behavior about when parties started to post.
I mean, but that's a cultural thing that shouldn't have been actually enforced, because that's in law that it would have had a chilling effect if you're only allowed to do it within that 4-week period. That's a thing that just is commonly understood and unfortunately was enforced, but that's not the case as this court has upheld.
I think I know why it's culturally understood that way, is because nobody changed in the way of this case, because nobody that was there understood to do this.
I mean, I think the people who would have done this at the time, but people graduate, people leave. Not everyone goes through these things. People sometimes just take people's at words face value, and what these things are read at without sometimes doing the digging necessary to understand the laws.
Do you have an example of the election commission allowing or holding campaigning outside of the election cycle?
I wouldn't know of an example.
So are you seeking
It's okay.
clarification? What exactly?
I'm just asking for this court to reaffirm its previous decision and not find us guilty.
I'm not sure if I'm interpreting the previous decision though, having come the same part in the sense that you're interpreting it. I don't know if my colleagues.
Yeah, I read this as a lot more wishy-washy.
I think they tried to dodge the question in this previous case.
I think so.
Pretty much. They said that we can't interpret the Constitution. There's a line in there saying that we don't have the ability to interpret the Constitution, and we're not going to go so far as to hold this, blah, blah, blah. And I don't think they ever actually determined whether 761.1, they say they don't want to go that far, but they don't actually say anything, in my opinion.
But this is the Constitution, this is the 700 codes.
Right, right. Thank you.
I don't have questions. What are your thoughts on the matter?
I'm still stuck on whether this does the 761.1. I'm just not sure if I can get to where it would, what does that statute do if not the way that it's been understood and enforced?
If I may add, I mean, sometimes people are imperfect, sometimes laws, things that are redundant get passed, and I think this court also shares your equal frustration with that.
They equate campaign-like activities to campaign in 700.4.
Hasn't been 700 codes been changed since then? I'm looking at 700 codes now, 700 D.
They're a bit different from what they were in the case, but it's just the exact subsection. Like in the case it was J, 700.4J, now it's now. That's not what it is.
It's the definitions that are like helpful to understand.
Yeah.
Since we're talking about the activity that they do.
Like, that just seems like a pointless thing to say if it's not. Campaigns, Thursday, active election cycle, and then after the elections. Like, I don't think anybody needs to be told that during the election cycle there are campaign activities happening. Because that seems to be all it does without this enforcement mechanism. So I don't know if I can read that as being whether or not that's what this case says. Which I don't think that's what it says, but even if that is what it said, I don't know if I agree with that.
Do you agree with the case or with the statute?
Oh, well, I can't disagree with the statute. I'm saying,
I mean, there's other places in the 700 code that refer to the election cycle and like when they were supposed to occur, which makes it understandable for the election cycle to just be stated as a statement of fact, if that makes sense, which would lend towards the argument because the supervisor of elections plan should be presented before the Senate 2 weeks prior to the election cycle, 714.91, indicating that declaring what the election cycle is has a purpose in and of itself, but not indicating that it necessarily mandates something, which is what he's arguing. I mean, textually, looking at 761.1, you can see why the previous court was struggling because there's no like mandating language whatsoever. But-
it could be written better, I don't think.
Yeah,
anybody can say-
like, obviously, but I don't know. The fact that so much precedent, like, I know he said he can't find an example, but I doubt there is an example of the election commission deciding that it's okay to campaign willy-nilly with those platforms, et cetera.
what our job is to do is to figure out if they, like the elections commission, like committed a plain error, like if it was arbitrary, like, and I just don't think. If there were, because this is not appeal, for like
This is
that's what our
appeal.
standard
For a
review
lower
is.
body.
Yes.
So we're reviewing this on if
De
the
novo.
commissioner abused their discretion.
I-
Which, just looking at it, I don't think so.
I don't think there was malicious intent. I don't think there was any malicious intent on behalf. I just think just generally how that was understood is and how it's typically been understood is for it to be a prohibition. But we're just saying that people are imperfect. We are just simply here to try to fix that error. Because, yeah.
I think kind of going off of what Steph was just saying, that there's a definition of election cycle. That's not me. And especially when that's used in this statute that would otherwise would be impotent under your rule or under your interpretation of this case. So I just don't know. I don't know if I can read that any other way.
I feel like the court's decision to state both explicitly campaign activities and campaign-like activities all kind of encompass in the same thing as trying to show that they have a very broad thing like, no, this is not to be a prohibition by any way, shape, or form. And that's all in the text.
I do think we interpret that case differently. But even if that is what it said, I don't agree with
Yeah,
that.
I think I just agree with that, even if that is the court's whole.
So, yeah, I mean,
This post that the parties made the post.
I believe so. Yeah, we were trying to be transparent as possible.
I think their sole argument is 761.1 is not something that is enforced by the Elections Commission. And thus, in enforcing it, the Elections Commission abuse their discretion. So I get their argument. I just don't think that's what says. I don't.
If that's the case, then there would never be any infraction if somebody was campaigning outside of that, which I can't imagine if that's what the court meant.
No, I understand, and I think that's why they kind of went out of their way to be like, no, we can still punish you for committing like infractions, but this one thing in particular is not an infraction.
So doing anything outside the election cycle is never an infraction?
No, you can like
So how
punish
do
that.
you distinguish between this one thing versus other things?
Like, in what do you mean by this thing?
What you did, for example, why would what you did not be considered an infraction?
Yeah.
Yeah, what's an example of an infraction outside of the election cycle?
Campaigning in the dorms, putting posters where they're not supposed to be.
It would be.
They explicitly say no.
It would be something that otherwise is offense. Any other.
Okay.
Yeah, I can get there.
Inside the election cycle
Yeah,
as well.
yeah. I think the sole issue we're here on is the meaning of 761.1. I think that's what it all comes down to. And the meaning of the case with respect to that. And so, to the extent that the case is saying that's not an enforcement mechanism, I think is completely wrong. And I would be inclined to overrule it to that extent. I don't think that's what the case says, but even if it were, I'm against that. I don't think that's correct.
It just says it's a demand. Like that it's not as a demand. Like there's no characterization of the statute that can be seen as a demand.
Yeah, I disagree with that.
That's this court's ruling.
And it would be mine to say that that's wrong. If your characterization is correct.
So you read 761.1 as a demand?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's using two terms that are defined, which is one being campaigning and two being election cycle. And the first and final days of elections. So it's three things that are defined elsewhere. I don't understand why we would define an election cycle unless it had meaning in a provision like this.
For when those things can
Otherwise,
occur.
What's the point of calling it? What's the point of having to start the finish line, time-wise?
To highlight the legal registration.
I mean, yeah, kind of what you said, other places in the 700 codes where they call for registration and speaking to supervisor elections and things like that, continue on the election cycle.
Well, those have deadlines. The election cycle timeline is based on those things. Those aren't,
Instead of the other way around.
right, I think it's a chicken, it's not like it's,
Right.
defining the election cycle is based on when those things happen, not the other way around. So, my question is, why would we go and define the election cycle based on those things if it didn't have any meaning? And I think 761.1 is giving that cycle meaning because it's saying you can't go campaign outside.
761.1 does not say you can't campaign outside of it.
Well, that's your argument.
No, I'm saying like how you're interpreting it, but I'm talking about verbatim. That's why I'm arguing because it doesn't say that.
Well, it says campaign activities begin on the first day of the election cycle. I don't know how to read that other than to
Must
the
begin.
exclusion of.
It says begin on the first day of the active election cycle.
Yeah, as in like just like it's like a statement. Like this court agreed that this was like redundant. Like it has agreed that that was just a bad statute way. It was a bad way of it being written. And it clarified that should not be a prohibition. Like, okay, we don't know how to interpret the rest of it. Not we, as in I'm summarizing the court's arguments. The rest of it is whether this is like to clarify or not. But at the very minimum, this cannot be a demand that campaigning can only start on the first day of the active election cycle.
Well, I think it is because the word begin, you can't have something begin that was already the case before.
If it was like the legal registration of it beginning, as she has mentioned, of like when you do the registration, when you get your candidates, when you do those formal things, when you can have it like lined up so you can have your candidate's name in the polling booth on election days.
Say again.
Like having it not begin.
Yeah, I mean, I think the word begin is the word begin.
Yeah.
If it begins on this, that means it was not.
Then why would it need to? Why would there be an end date? Even?
Yeah.
Like, why?
So again,
why would people just campaign?
I think anyway-
We don't want to set. That's
Right.
bad policy.
Well, I'm not
Just
worried
not
about
like-
policy, I'm worried just about what the text says. I feel like you can't have something beginning if it already was permitted. So,
I think policy is important to consider as well. But, yeah.
I mean, the Senate can go and change this if they want to worry about policy. I'm just looking at how it reads, and it just doesn't make sense to me.
I think this is poorly written statute.
I
think
agree.
it is, and I think that it is intended to demand it, and I think I disagree with part what you and yeah.
It just doesn't say, it literally says it's not a demand though. Like I understand you interpret that, but this court has literally already said it's not a demand. Like this has happened before. Like I understand.
I disagree with this court precedent.
Yeah, again, I don't agree with your interpretation of the use of the word demand, because the sentence following that is another absolute, which says it's not a demand of no activities. So I think that's them trying to.
Which one are you looking at? Active of, there is no campaigning, there is no indication anywhere within the 700 codes that the intention of this statute, 761.1, was to ensure that no campaigning activities can take place on behalf of any candidate or political party outside of the designated election cycle. It's saying like, no, like there's no way this can be. Like this is interpreted in any other way. Like this is not a demand. Like it goes out multiple times to state that this is not a demand. You can't have a strict liability.
I think the court was just trying to be very careful about stopping, like you said, with registration, preparation.
Preparing finances,
That's
but
what
nothing
they-
on an official
yeah.
platform.
No, it
That's
says it's-
really important too.
It says it.
That's what Connor's saying also.
I know what the text says, but I think the court's intent was to not set a hard limit about banning campaign-like activities.
Conversations on campus about the campaign, like is that considered campaign
But they didn't come
activities?
all the way out and explicitly hold that.
And I think that complements the court's explicit holding at the end of the text too.
Yes,
Where
but
I feel like that's the most clear that this case is sounded.
you can't understand that without reading the previous thing where it outlines campaigning and campaign activities.
Exactly, our perspective on it too. I think there's two different readings into it, but I feel like I see where that court was coming from and that they didn't want to draw that hard line rule to prohibit people getting penalized for having conversations on campus, preparing their finances, those minuscule things. But I don't think that that was meant to make this statute not be followed and meaningless. I think that is most important. And I think completely disregarding those rules is not what this court wanted.
No, I understand that, but as you have stated, campaigning does incur publishing materials during a particular frame. Like campaigning and campaign activities include the things that we, like what you said, that like we did, right, which we did. But it also, it says that those things are not to demand that those things can only happen on the first day of election cycle. And it explicitly goes to those things that you defined about like us posting stuff.
They specifically said posting? Yes.
Yes. Electronically
On
or
the very top of page 10.
Well, at the very bottom, they allow campaign-like activities and the 700 codes equate campaign-like activities and campaigning. So in their conclusion, this court is hinting at allowing that outside of the election cycle, I think.
I feel like I'd be more inclined to like overrule.
That's what I'm thinking. I think that this is an incorrect decision.
Yeah.
But I hear his reading of it. I think I hear his reading of those sentences, and I think that it makes sense, but I think that this court wrongly decided this issue. Because they made 761.1 pretty much meaningless.
So you have one thing, either you have full-blown campaigning 24/7, or you have to literally start formulating your team when campaigning starts.
They tried to distinguish it, and they didn't.
Right,
Yeah.
all they're trying to do is say 761.1 is not a draconian measure that gives the elections commission power to go after everybody.
Those are details.
So I don't think it, I mean, I don't know if I would overrule it, but I don't know if we have to.
I
So,
don't think we do either, because it like seems like it talks about a spectrum, a degree of like campaigning, because it talks about, let me see, it says, to hold otherwise would be to impose strict liability on virtually every student remotely involved in the campaign. It's talking about the small activities, the small campaign-like activities. That's not something that the supervisor of elections is going after, but this right here was posting the literal like, platform. Like that is not campaign-like, that is not minuscule, that's not remote, that's like what you do to campaign.
Mhm.
So that is something that the supervisor of elections goes after under 761.
Yes, but that's not supposed to happen because it also said that the definition of campaigning, which is what we did, should not, like it doesn't say campaign like, it says campaigning and campaign activities, which is understood to be both used interchangeably.
But now that I look at this again, in the 700 codes, campaign activities and campaigning is equated, but not campaign-like activities, which now I see the distinction made by the elections commissioner by saying that this court actually did hold campaigning by choosing to use that language in the conclusion, which is this court's attempt, like I said, at being wishy-washy. But that makes me think, like you said, we do not need to overrule it.
And I think just like the call of the question, do we think the elections commission made an error here? No, I don't. Yeah.
I think it's possible, but it is, I mean, I can't, this is just what the court has said. Whatever you guys choose to do is entirely up to yourselves, but I'm just stating that if we were to uphold this ruling, that this would fall squarely within this example.
You only received the warning, right? Or
Yeah, it was just a warning.
yeah, are y'all
Questions?
ready?
Do we, if you believe that the elections commission did use their discretion?
I don't think they. No, I'm sorry. Are you deliberating among yourselves right now? Am I not allowed to chime in at any moment? I just want to understand if I'm allowed to speak or not.
If you have something to say, you can say it right now because we're about to enter voting.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I rest my case. I believe that it explicitly says that campaigning, campaign activities, and iteration of that should not be prohibited outside the election cycle. So I would just like to re-ask for the court to reaffirm its previous decision.
Thank you. we will now be entering voting for fall 2024 Elections Commission appeal. Can I have, actually, I need someone to second it. Can I have a motion to enter voting?
Yes.
Second.
I moved to enter vote.
Okay, cool. Somebody has a second, I think.
Second.
Thank you. So we are now in voting, and I'm going to be asking if you agree that the elections commissioner did not abuse their discretion, vote yes.
Yes.
Yes. I'm not sure if there was, I don't think there was anything else to recall.
I mean, everything else was embedded in that.
And that, so, I mean, with that being said, we have found that the EC performed its duties in their discretion, and there was no abuse of discretion.
And are you going to be basically overturning this precedent then, I'm guessing?
I believe that'll probably be more detailed in the opinion or opinions that come out.
But I didn't ask to see if the election commission abused her discretion. I'm just asking for the court to reaffirm. Like I don't.
Your
That's the
petition
standard
asks us
review.
to overturn the previous ruling
It's
of
like
the
the legal
elections
standard.
commission.
But on the not on the basis. I see.
So we're not saying that. You don't need that.
Yeah, I think it's malicious. Okay.
Okay, and with that, the elections commission's decision has been affirmed. Thank you for coming and.
Thank you.
Court is adjourned.